So in this session, I'd like to talk to you about good foundational structures for church plants. I want to give you some advice and some principles that we've learned. Your best friend will be your web browser though. Check up on some of these things that we're talking about. Talk to other people that know about it as well. So we've looked at 50 churches that died, 50 church plants that died, and we did post-mortem on them. And we discovered that there was 5 factors that was common to each one of those churches that died. The first one was the spiritual factor that was involved. And that included things like, was there a gift or a call to planting? And in the 50 that died, that wasn't there. Was there a vision for the plant? And that wasn't there. So obviously one is needed. The second thing is that those churches started without a critical mass. They didn't have a critical mass of people. They didn't have a critical mass of ministry. They didn't have a critical mass of resources. And they didn't have a critical mass of knowledge to do what they were doing. The third thing is they didn't really have a relational buy-in with something larger than themselves. They weren't involved with larger churches or with movements or denominations that were around them. They didn't connect with people that had gone before, that had experience. They weren't in any kind of training stream themselves. The fourth thing that we found is that really they didn't have the dedicated time to grow the church. Unless a church planter can free up 1 to 2 days a week from secular work, even though they might be bivocational, all that they can do if they're working full-time is just to keep up with the meetings that have to occur in a church. But they don't really have the dedicated time to apply themselves to the things that have to be done to get a church to grow that we're going to talk about in these sessions. Now that's difficult to do, to get that extra time. But the ones that succeeded managed to find the time. The fifth thing that we found is that the church planters or the teams were not very good strategic thinkers or planners. They simply held meetings, but they weren't able to strategically work themselves through problems or into healthy situations. There's a saying that says ministry builds people and leadership builds churches. So a lot of planters just got involved with ministry, but didn't really put in that strategic leadership that needed to happen. Again, I encourage you to get online. There's a lot of material about learning how to be a strategic thinker and a strategic planner. We'll talk some more about it in the sessions. But in this session, I want to talk about some foundational structures. And for a church plant, all of the foundational structures really have to be basically around gathering and equipping. If you're not gathering or equipping, look at it and don't do it. You have to gather. You have to gather people together. You have to gather people to a vision. You have to gather people to a cause. You have to gather people to Christ. You have to gather people together. And then we have to equip people. We have to equip people to be a Christian, to serve, to lead, equip them to minister, equip them to grow in character, equip them to be great mums and dads, equip them to overcome things in life. So systems need to help people to gather and together and equip. Those systems do need leadership. It's one of the things I talked about, that people are looking after the systems and working on the systems. And people need to trust the people that they're being gathered to. They need to trust the vision they're being gathered to. They need to trust the people that are equipping them. And so there has to be a sense of credibility and professionalism and accountability, has to be spirituality to the people that are involved, because confidence and trust is needed if people are going to gather to you and they're going to be prepared to be equipped by you. So the structure of a church generally is one where there is a pastor, or there are a number of pastors and ministers, and where there are a group of people that could be called the committee or the board, but they're involved with the fiduciary and financial matters of the church. And so typically we would talk about eldership, and we would talk about board. Now, one of the things about elders that I found is that unless they are in the biblical mold of elders, i.e. that they are pastors or presbyters, bishops, in the way that the Bible puts them together with elders there, so that they're not just, good-natured older guys, then appointing elders really can be a problem in the church. Let me just say that to you. Because unless they are on a board which is governed by the Incorporations Act in the state, or whether they are credential ministers and therefore they have the oversight of a movement, people that fall in the middle and come under neither of those authorities, if you like, when things go bad, that becomes a problem of regulation. So let me just say at the beginning, when you're setting foundational structures, have pastors, have board members as the oversight of the church, and then have other ministries that are involved in the function of the church. And that's one of the best ways that you can set up a church. So a legal entity is required to operate today in the world. The legal entity isn't the overriding authority in a church. The legal entity, it could be an incorporated association, a company, an unincorporated association. Really, it's a servant. It's an interface between the church and the world. It allows the church to bank, it allows the church to take out leases, to have insurance, and it also requires the church to fulfill the laws of the land in regard to finances, in regard to looking after children, and all those kinds of things. So we, on our webpage, the ACC Victoria webpage, we have a list there of things that need to be done in setting up, for instance, an incorporated association and registering with the ACNC, the ATO, and other organisations to get insurance, to set up bank accounts and so forth. So that's there, and you can work through that. It's pretty detailed. But within the church, setting up the oversight of the church is important, particularly when you're starting off. In the beginning, most everything will be a launch team. They will be people who come together in leadership for a season. And that's the best thing to do. Don't appoint people forever. It's very easy to appoint. It's hard to unappoint. So if people are given specific tasks for a specific time and a season that they agree to, that's the best thing that you can really think about. So in the church, you're going to have church activity leadership. That might be somebody overseeing the music or overseeing children's ministries, whatever. And you're going to have this other group overseeing the fiduciary and financial matters of the church. The Incorporations Act in Victoria calls that a committee of management. Some churches call it a board. But whether it's the pastoral ministry or whether it's the committee of management, all of them are leaders within a church, and they're all there to serve the body basically. The Bible is the church's main charter, and the Incorporations Act is the charter for the legal entity of the church, and both need to work together closely. Could be that the pastoral ministry feel that they want to appoint ministry into a local school, a chaplaincy, whatever it might be, and that's something that they believe that is strategic and they've heard from God about it. Then the board might come in on that and determine how many days a week they are able to do that, and what are the structures and strictures of that organisation. So people work together in leadership in that way. And so you have the Ephesians 4 ministry gifts and the Romans 12 ministry gifts working together in a balanced way. And that way it runs well. When you're first starting out, you have a smaller church, probably the two groups of people are together in the one leadership structure, but as your church grows, it might be that the eldership and the board function in separate meetings, but still need to get together, cross-pollinate, obviously be engaged with one another, and you need to set up systems for that. So when you're determining who to put into positions, take the advice of Scripture and don't lay hands on people suddenly. In other words, if they're just novices and they've had no experience, Rather, you just ask them to fulfill tasks rather than to fulfill positions and titles. So a committee of management in the Act says you have to have 3 people. So it's better that the pastor and spouse are not one of those 3. So typically it's best to have 5 people on a committee of management, just for transparency and accountability, and just also for the resource that those people bring. Depends on what your articles of incorporation and your rules and so forth say anyway. That's your charter for how you operate with the board. You don't have to have the most knowledgeable people on your committee of management. You can always resource outside of your board. People have greater knowledge that are prepared to help you. The people that need to be on the board are the people that have had the buy-in to the vision, they're giving to it financially, they're loyal, and people of good character that the other people in the church can trust and have confidence in going forward. But other people that have expertise can be outside of that board. Also, you know, there will be a treasurer on that board, but it could be that the bookkeeper is somebody that is outside and might not even be in the church, but somebody that you can pay to do that job. And if you don't have anybody in the church, I encourage you to definitely to do that, because the finances and keeping them in good order is a big deal. Also, when you're putting together a committee of management or even an eldership, it's a good idea not just to say, well, you know, would you be on the board or would you be on this eldership, but actually to determine what it is that you want fulfilled on the board. So it might be that there's a treasurer's position, but really that person then needs to have a job description about what that means, from collecting an offering or bringing an income through counting it, getting into the bank, getting records for it, getting reports back to the board. So there's a whole job description. Every person on the board of the committee ideally would have a job description. Somebody might be overseeing areas of human resources. Another person might be looking after assets. Another person after what happens on Sunday. Another person is the secretary or public officer if it's an incorporation. And that deals with the fiduciary responsibilities that are involved in such an organisation. So when they have their portfolios and agree to it, then that can be a good board position. The same with an eldership. Not all elders or pastors are called to rule. Some minister. But again, it's a matter of having them there with a portfolio and coming together to form a good board, and everybody knows why they're there. They're not just simply coming together to get good ideas and the pastor has to go away and do them all. That's a recipe for very little being done. Also in those meetings, when you have those meetings, people should take responsibilities for decision made, so it doesn't all come back to the planter, but people actually have their names or initials down next to the things that are undertaken to be done, so that there's some accountability for the doing of it. And it's a good idea to have regular meetings of this mix of board and eldership in the beginning, because then decisions are kept on track. And decisions are held accountable so that they're actually worked through and have an outcome. Also, when you get together regularly, you build relationships in the beginning, and that's very important to keep communication channels open and to understand one another. You're going to have different gift mixes in the beginning when you've got just one leadership team, because there's going to be people that have different personalities and different callings, and so it's going to have to be a degree of understanding of one another. Some people will think something's boring, somebody will think it's exciting at the same time. So it's just a matter of keeping that working together and as you're going forward. Also, it gives you times, even though you might not have a lot of business to do in a small church, to meet every month. There are times when you can train in knowledge. You can bring somebody in that can open up areas that you're not sure about. Areas perhaps like setting up the best child-proof church that you can. or looking through potential problems and how would you handle it. And of course you can always then find time to find out what the scriptures say about your call in that leadership, and also have times to pray together and to pray for one another. When you come together, it's important to keep minutes and keep records and keep accounts. The paper trail or the computer trail is really important. It safeguards who you are and what you do and the decisions made, and it keeps you tracking all the time because you can look back so that you can move forward. One of the big deals in a church really is the structure, the foundations for finances. And for this also you need good records and reports. In another session we're going to talk about how to get the finances and the assets that a church needs. But having got them, they really need to have monthly reports, good profit and loss statements, and bank reconciliation to know what's truly happening in the church with finances. Another thing is to set good financial budgets every year, to know what it is that you're going to spend money on. Now, the budget should be set up off your vision and off your mission and off the plans to fulfill the vision and the mission, to set the plans up for that, and then to finance those plans, and therefore the budget is determined. So not everybody has to come together every time something wants to be bought or something wants to be spent. And because you have a budget, it's good to have a year-to-date report to every board meeting so you know how each of the budget line items are travelling, whether you're getting too close to using it all up or whether you've hardly touched it. Therefore, what are we doing in that area? A lot of churches, for instance, talk about evangelism but don't budget into evangelism. And so really, if the budget for evangelism is not being used, then perhaps no evangelism is occurring, or no marketing is occurring, for instance. So it's a good way to track those kinds of things. Your finances really need good programs to operate, and there are a number of them, whether it's QuickBooks or MOYB. You can buy those, or you can engage a bookkeeper that already has them to use, but it's good to use a proper system. Always have two people who are authorised for every transaction, and that means not the pastor and another family member. It can be the pastor as long as it's someone else. The makeup of the board, should be at the most two people from one family out of the five. If you really got to bring in other people, then extend your board, but there's only such an extent that you can do that too. And just because one person has a gift to be on the board doesn't mean their spouse does. And so be very rigid with that. Just because somebody has the gifting to be on the eldership doesn't mean their spouse does. It's important just to keep it focused, because when you meet together to make decisions and you have someone there who doesn't have the call or gifting from that, it can become, very confusing. And so systems need to be involved, for instance, in the area of finances that I was talking about. That's everything from the collection to the counting of the collection, to having several people sign off on that, to how it's banked, to having reconciled the receipts for what is banked, to what comes back to the reports. And really all money should go through the accounts. The church should never be a cash economy. Do not pay cash to visiting ministers. We do not want to contribute to the black economy. Do not pay things in cash. The cash box today is dead. We need a paper trail and for all transactions, and really authorised people could have a debit card or online purchasing that's set up, or their accounts that's set up, or bank transfers that occur. But everywhere there should be a budget and a paper trail without cash being used in that way. And so when you're creating a budget, typically when you're starting out in a church, though things can change as you grow, typically a good breakup of the budget is something like 30-30-10. 30% on ministry, 30% on the facility that has to be used, 30% on perhaps wages, and 10% to give away. And if you're operating with that in the beginning, you're pretty well able to do good ministry, have good facilities and assets, and give that 1 or 2 days a week for that paid position that I was talking about that really is necessary for a church to get off the ground in a good way. So when you're setting a budget, remember to have in there things like part of an honour budget. So the end of the year, you can honour your leaders, you can honour the workers. You're able to do that. A lot of people don't have the budget, therefore they don't do it. There's no money for training in the budget, but without training, that equipping that I talked about, you really don't move forward. There should be money in the budget for the pastoral leaders to go to conferences, to engage, to not be isolated. Remember, they were one of the factors that killed churches, being isolated. Also, there needs to be a resource budget for the things that you're starting. I encourage you to look at keeping margins in your budget. Chris Hodges of a church in America, Church of the Highlands, has written on this, and he keeps margins in his budget. So he will always set a budget for the next year, which is not 10% higher, but 10% less, and keep everything within that. So at the end of the year, if he does increase by 10%, he has 20% of all the finances in the bank for the year after that. And that church has not had to ever borrow to buy all the buildings that they've built because of setting margins in what they do. And it doesn't put people under stress. Finances, or the lack of finances or assets, put a lot of people under stress. A lot of pastors say, well, we have the faith to believe. Well, faith needs to be mixed with good stewardship and good planning. And if really you want to do something beyond the tithe, then raise the funds for it. If it catches the people and you're able to share the vision for it, then the funds will come in for it, and you will be able to do it above tithe. But don't put the burden on the tithe. Let the tithe be able to carry the church forward basically without stress on it. So let me also just mention membership. Membership of an incorporation is required. And an incorporation requires a minimum of 5 members, and that's a legal membership. But it may be that people are members or partners of the church. So there are a number of models that operate, and depends on how you want to operate. Some people operate that the people who are members of the church become members of the incorporation. So they have the legal vote on everything that the incorporation does because they are members of the church. Some people have partnership with the church, but they have a limited membership of board and spouses and leaders and spouses, a number of other people. The Act just simply requires that the incorporated membership is representative of the bigger bodies. So you might have blue collar, white collar, male, female, different age groups and so forth that are involved with that. Because at times a lot of people in the church just don't really want to bother with the legal side of it. They're happy just to be able to let a group of people deal with that. And but if you have that model, then transparency is still important. And so making, for instance, your audited statement at the end of every year, or your profit and loss statement, if you're in that band with the ATO, available to the bigger body is important. Also, creating a bylaw that says that any time that you're going to take up major loans, that even though legally the incorporated membership may be able to decide that, but that you bring that to the bigger membership of the body, because in the end they've got to get behind it to pay for it, and they own it. Let me also say about that the simpler your constitution is, as long as it recovers all the required legal areas, the better, really. If your incorporation is too complex, it can bind you up in years to come. It is difficult to change. But you can create bylaws that you operate by through any particular system, and those bylaws are created legally, but they can be changed and adjusted much quicker and much easier. And so let me just talk about structuring your meetings in the church. Let me just say, don't have too many. Too many meetings will kill really what the church is about and the life of the church. I think you could get away with 2 meetings a week pretty well for the general public. If you had a public meeting and then alternating meetings of whether they be small groups, whether it be a prayer meeting, whether it be a life track type meeting where different things can be achieved, leadership training, DNA for new partners, new Christians, whatever it might be, you can pretty well get away with that. Now, you may hold specific times of meetings, outreaches and conferences and so forth, but in the general running of the church, it gives people time to do the things of being able to reach out to people, to learn, to have family time, to still have a life, basically. And so think about the meetings before you put them on. You need the public meeting of the church? Absolutely. And usually at the same time, there's a children's ministry? Absolutely. Probably the integral thing, structure-wise, to have in a church in the public meeting there is good ministry, good word and prayer for people, and a ministry for children, and the ministry of coffee, to be able to get together with people and to have that time together. Any church that really wants to grow and continue to grow needs to have a minimum of 60% of its people in small groups. Now, those small groups can be different. They can, as long as they've got a social aspect, a Bible aspect, and a prayer aspect to them, they can operate a number of ways, and we'll talk about it in another session. And the other thing that churches really need foundationally is you need information. Get information. Without information, you will not get inspiration about where you're going to go. And information is important. I also encourage you to set up databases to that end. You need statistics and you need information. Just need simple ones. Again, you can download them, you can find them on the web. You need statistics, Sunday statistic, midweek, children, income, salvation, baptisms, all those things. You need information, you need names and contacts and details, and to keep it up to date. I always found when you're beginning a small church that you can keep in contact with people through these days. You can do it through a number of programs that are available on people's iPhones or iPads, or simply just with emails, just sending them out, keeping people in the loop. I would do that every week when I'm planning a church, just to keep people in the loop. I'd also have a leadership group. It might be on WhatsApp, and just keep in contact with them on top of having those coffees. I would never come into a board meeting for a decision to be made formally if I haven't had coffees and talked through the issues with my board members through the life of the month or the 2 months or the 3 months it takes to make various decisions in that way. And so if you're keeping statistics, then you'll know that when your numbers are up and your numbers are down, could be long weekends, could be school holidays, could be winter months, whatever. So you'll then be able to plan off those things so that you can, for instance, hold baptismal services or children's dedications on the down weekends or the down months, so that even though you might not have bumper crowds, you can keep even crowds and therefore level out your attendances and just look for steady growth instead of the thing going up and down all over the place. Information allows you to set up systems and know that those systems work and operate, and they can be mechanisms for growth and for health for you. So I would encourage you to create dashboards that you can bring to meetings, and do that in each of your departments so they can see in a picture form clearly how things are traveling. The dashboards, you can download them, Google it, look for it. Need to have on them the things that are really important to you. They might be things like attendance, finances, salvations, baptisms, but the things that you can see at a glance how you are traveling. And so some of these systems and structures you can set up, really need to think about it. So I encourage you to take some of the things I've talked about in this session and just unpack it a bit and look a little further, and I hope that it's helped you in what you're about to do. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you.